Hello, welcome back to another video. Today is a story about a evil woman. She goes by the name of Susan Leigh Smith, who lives in Union, South Carolina. She was born on September 26, 1971. Fun fact, that's actually a day before my birthday. Not the 1971, obviously, but the September 26th. Union, South Carolina is the kind of place that calls itself wholesome because it irons its curtains. It has just enough traffic lights to pretend it's modern, and just enough gossip to prove that it isn't. The houses wear their porches like Sunday hats. The people wear their smiles like freshly bleached teeth. If you live there long enough, you learn the choreography. Wave at the right driveways, compliment the right people, and never mention rot in the beams. Politeness keeps the termites employed. Politeness, in fact, is the town's official pesticide. Spread liberty over any nest that looks too active. In Union, small talk is a martial art. Compliments are weapons dipped in sugar. Everyone learns the duel by 15. The women run committees the way generals run campaigns, like it's a strategic objective. God is invited in every event, even if he's only there to bless the coleslaw. People introduce themselves by lineage, who they are descended from, who they married into, which graveyard their parents are respectable enough to haunt. I admire the honesty. Announcing your ghost at the door saves time. Into this county fair diorama arrived Susan Leigh Smith on September 26, 1971. To Linda and Harry. Her birth certificate didn't carry a trigger warning, though perhaps it should have. The mathematics of her childhood were solved early and cruelly. One mother, one father, minus one father by his own hand when she was 6. Suicide was a talent for wrapping itself in silence. It leaves the house looking almost normal while every clock inside of it runs a little wrong. Doors don't slam quite right. Hallways become wind tunnels of memory. A child will try to keep the old time anyway. She would smile in school pictures as if the photographer can't see the crack down the middle. A father's departure isn't just absence, it's a weather system. Entire rooms warp their purpose around it. Kitchens become confessionals. Bedrooms become archives. The dining table becomes a witness stand where no one swears in. People bring casseroles because bringing the truth would be rude. Everyone agrees to step carefully around the crater in the living room. Children become expert geologists, learning the weight and shape of the hole by walking its edge in socked feet. Linda remarried. His name was Beverly Russell, which sounds like a company that sells respectable insurance. Not a stepfather who will fracture a teenager's trust through skin, breath, and beds. Union is very good at omitting unpleasant nouns. It likes to call predators rumors and rumors gossip, and gossip concern. The calibration is deliberate. It keeps church pews comfortable. It keeps prayer lists tidy. It allows the choir to sing without choking on what is lodged in their throats. If Beverly had worn a villain's cape, perhaps Union would have objected. But villains here dress like committee chairs and Rotary brunch hosts. You know the type. The handshake is firm, the laugh is democratic, the eyes are careful accountants of who is watching. He didn't just violate a girl, he did something more strategic. He taught her that love is a costume that unzips at the worst possible times. He taught her that the word family is a glass bottle, appealing, fragile, perfect for breaking. What did Susan learn here? Not trigonometry, a more durable arithmetic. That appearances are currency and secrecy is a safe deposit box. That if you smile, you are believed, and if you cry on cue, you are adored. At school, she looked all-American, which is a costume with built-in lighting. She wore approachable like lipstick. She wore ordinary like perfume. She practiced the science of being believed. It is a science most girls perfect before they are old enough to vote. Their thesis defense happens in parking lots and kitchens, often at night, often without witness. People describe her as sweet, friendly, average, which is a very tidy way of saying they never looked closely. A town like Union trains you to keep your eyes on the stage and off the trapdoor. The sets are quaint. The props smell like lemon oil. The director instructs you to clap when prompted. Children raised in such theaters become quick change artists. Susan learned to gild between rooms like fog noticed and unexamined. She learned that if you smile convincingly enough, people will applaud you while you pick their pockets. You can rob a bank with a bouquet of lilies if the timing is right. None of this is destiny. It's only kindling. Some girls take their kindling and build a campfire. Others find a match in strong east wind. By the time Susan graduated, she had learned 3 truths. Union never advertises. That grief breeds secrecy. Secrecy breeds stories, and stories, if fed and praised, grow teeth. She also learned a 4th, more dangerous theorem. If you can make your audience cry, they won't notice your hand on the lever. I will grant her one more lesson, the bleakest one. In a town that worships appearance, the person who can manufacture them most convincingly becomes its high priest. Susan learned the liturgy. She learned when to bow her head and when to raise her eyes. She learned which prayers earn forgiveness and which sins, if spoken sweetly, are never named out loud. Union supplied the hymn book. Susan carried the tune. She met David Smith under fluorescent lights at Winn-Dixie, the kind of brilliance that erased texture. They were teenagers stocking shelves. She with her careful face, he with simple goodness. Grocery stores are excellent at arranging illusions. Pyramid the oranges, align the labels, pretend the world is organized. The barcode sign you believe in order is romantic in a sterile, linoleum sort of way. Love at first pallet jack. By 1991, they were married, 19 and 20, young enough to mistake momentum for maturity. Paper rings look like gold on the right finger. They looked like gold on theirs. Marriage, like grocery merchandising, relies on facing things forward, keeping the bruises in the back. Rotate the milk, smile in the aisle. David was better at sincerity than spectacle. He loved the way earnest people love, fully without double-checking the exits. Susan loved the way performers love, fully as long as the lighting was flattering. Neither is a crime. It's just a mismatch of spotlights. Michael arrived first, the sensitive one with a gaze that seemed to recognize that the planet is a haunted house and we are its cordial guests. He had the solemnity of children who listen closely to air. He made eye contact like it mattered. Alex followed smaller connect, a boy who believed gravity was negotiable if you smiled while arguing with it. He laughed in commas, not periods. Everything he did promised the next thing. The boy made the house bright. He also made it loud. Anyone who has lived with toddlers knows that joy is a percussion instrument that practices all day. People said David was a proud father. He was, and that Susan was a marvelous mother. The town gave her a crown woven in adjectives: hand-on, patient, loving. She wore it everywhere. Crowns are heavier than they look. The problem with crowns is not the weight. It's the posture they require. Hold your head just so, and you will not notice your neck stiffening. Hold it long enough, and you will forget how to look down. The praise was relentless and efficient. Church nurseries adored her. Daycare staff whispered her name with relief. Neighbors noticed how clean the boys' faces were, how prompt they were buckled, and how solicitous her tone remained at hour 13 of a day designed by chaos. Praise is sedative with a paradoxical side effect. It keeps you awake at night. The more Union applauded, Susan had to rehearse. Every feeding had to be maternal. Every scolding tender, every daycare pickup photogenic. She turned motherhood into a stage that never went dark. That is exhausting. Exhaustion like shortcuts. Shortcuts like lies. Lies thrive in laundry baskets and minivans. They smelled like spilled juice and lavender spray. The marriage buckled. It wasn't dramatic at first. No thunderclaps, no dishes hurled like planets escaping orbits. Boredom took a hammer to the foundation. Resentment brought nails. Infidelity did the trim work. You can call it affairs if you're feeling prissy. It was more like two people casting around for mirrors that didn't make them look like the parents or failures. David's reflection arrived as Tiffany, a familiar face with a new purpose. The past repurposed as a lifeboat. Susan's reflection arrived as Tom Finley, the kind of man who keeps his shirts crisp and his expectations crisper. He worked at a textile company and carried himself like a future that would not tolerate crumbs, noise, or car seats. He liked his life lint-free. Children are made of lint. Tom had that angular bachelor's grace that convinces certain women he can chisel them into the shape of life he wants. His apartment probably smelled like judgment and eucalyptus. His refrigerator likely contained water, condiments, and an insult to leftovers. He was handsome the way a closed door is handsome, sleek, silent, and pathetic about privacy. Susan studied that door like an architect plans an entrance. She wanted through. David wanted something similar. A family that behaved, a wife who returned in unguarded sincerity, a house where laughter didn't sound like it was checking its makeup. He wasn't perfect. No mortal is. But there's a difference between being imperfect and auditioning for new lives while the old one is still on stage. By spring 1994, the Smiths had separated, and Union said the thing it always says when a marriage dies politely. At least they were good parents. Outsiders saw them exchange the boys without drama. They saw David show up, saw Susan kneel to tie a shoe, saw them trade schedules like diplomats swapping treaties. The public performance was flawless. This is how you know it was a performance. How good parents are often exhausted, flawless ones are usually acting. The difference is measurable in the length of a smile. Here's an uncomfortable observation. People who master performance can do anything on stage. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it to be accurate. When your life requires you to keep two faces polished, mother and lover, you become adept at rotating masks without smearing the paint. The problem isn't the mask, it's the audiences, who clap too loudly to notice the blood on the chin. Union is a very loud audience. It loves ovations. It loves the kind of stories that end with a bow. Susan discovered something powerful. Praise and secrecy from an alloy stronger than steel. She could be devoted mother in one scene and smoldering girlfriend in the next. And the costume change would look like a miracle rather than a warning. Tom didn't want children. David loved his. Susan wanted Tom's approval like oxygen. Oxygen is famously flammable. I won't claim clairvoyance, but long before lakes enter the story, you can already hear water in the pipes. The house hisses, the crown tilts, the grocery store lights flickered overhead, showing more than anyone wants to admit. That order is a display, not a guarantee. That labels face forward until hands decide they shouldn't. That a thing can look perfect seconds before it spoils. If you're waiting for thunder, you'll miss the fuse. It's often quiet. It sounds a lot like breathing. October 25th, 1994 came on like a lullaby sung slightly off-key. The sort of evening that pretends to be ordinary because it knows you prefer your catastrophes to arrive dressed as Tuesday. The boys were dressed, fed, buckled, ritualized into compliance. Routine is how parents keep chaos sleepy. The same spoon, the same cartoon song, and the same argument with the shoelace that still refuses to learn knot theory. Around 8 p.m., Susan fastened Michael and Alex into their car seats, harnesses snug, chins glazed with the last sugar of the day, while telling herself a story about visiting a friend named Mitch. If you tell a story firmly enough, sometimes the world nods and lets you pass without even checking your luggage. Words are malleable if you warm them with desperation. They bend, then they break. Driving at night in Union is like moving through a photograph that hasn't decided whether it's comforting or haunted. Porches glow. Ditchwater reflects the moon as it's auditioning for sainthood. Tires whisper. If your conscience is quiet, the road hums you to the destination you deserve. If your conscience is loud, the hum sounds like a verdict. Susan drove. She knew the roads. Everyone here does. Union breeds homing pigeons, not explorers. Shortly before 9 p.m., a different door opened. Shirley McLeod's. She did not audition for this role. The script conscripted her. Susan appeared on Shirley's porch like panic wrapped in a cardigan, voice carved down to splinters, repeating the same line until it lost its meaning and became a sound effect. He has my kids. He took my kids. Hysteria is persuasive because it borrows truth's posture. Shirley did what decent people do when confronted with emergency at their threshold. She opened the door and called the police. Goodness is simple. It's also terribly inconvenient. The story spilled as if it had been rehearsed in the mirror. A black man approached Susan's car at a red light near Monarch Mills. Knit cap like a shadow-given texture, gun-like punctuation. He slid into the passenger seat, an uninvited pronoun. He turned her sentence into a command. He forced her to drive. 4 miles, she said, then ordered her out by the sign for John D. Long Lake. When she begged to take the boys, he said he didn't have time. I admire a lie that chooses efficiency as its alibi. It saves everyone the trouble of pretending kindness was ever on the table. Let's not be coy. When small southern towns manufacture monsters, they do not reinvent the wheel, they repaint it. The phantom black man is an heirloom lie, polished for media glare, borrowed whenever someone needs fear to do heavy lifting. It weaponizes prejudice and launders motive. It is as lazy as it is lethal. In moments like this, a community's bias becomes a volunteer with a flashlight and a clipboard. The search narrows to the face that the lie provides. Meanwhile, the truth goes swimming. Police arrived and did what procedure demands. Catalog the nouns, triangulate the verbs, pin the adverbs like butterflies. Trauma makes memory slippery, yes, but even slippery stories usually stain somewhere. This one didn't. It slid around the room with a flexibility that suggested choreography. She described the gun, the press of it, the drive, the order to exit, the refusal of the boys, beats time to the metronome of audience expectation. Then the practical devotions of panic took over. Sirens stitched the night. Floodlights interrogated grass. Helicopters combed air that had asked to be parted. Dogs translated the language of dirt. Crushed clover here, disturbed gravel there. Volunteers materialized from porches and prayers. Neighbors, ex-boyfriends, cousins of cousins, mothers who couldn't stop seeing their own car seats every time they blinked. The town smelled like diesel and coffee and hopeful sweat. Someone set up a folding table because you cannot serve grief without snacks. The South has rules. Posters went up with little faces that never chose to be photogenic. The boys' names turned metallic from overuse on microphones. Candles flickered in front of the police stations until the wax looked like melted bone. People cried on camera the way people do when they need their tears to count towards a solution. The country turned in. moved by the symmetry, a disassembled marriage temporarily reassembled by catastrophe. This kind of visible grammar wins rating and donations. Susan and David stood together in front of cameras, a diptych of anguish. Susan clutched his sleeve like a stage direction had demanded it. David's voice trembled with an honesty that didn't know how to perform. Their union ruptured in private, briefly resurrected for public consumption. They pleaded. They promised forgiveness. They offered a ransom to fate. The cameras drank it in, and the nation found its news story to whisper over dinner. Even cynics like a miracle they can schedule. But while the audience's hands were busy ringing, the lake remained unwrung. John D. Long Lake is not ostentatious. It is a bowl of dark glass, useful to anglers and liars alike. In daylight, it reflects clouds with a flattering filter. At night, it becomes a wide pupil, calmly absorbing headlights and secrets. People like to say water cleanses. It does. It cleanses evidence of body warmth. It launders sound. It polishes metal into memory. It accepts everything because it refuses to care. Stand at the shore and listen. If you're patient, you can hear the sound that haunts this case more than crying or sirens or microphones. Gravity doing exactly what it always does. Gravity never panics. It simply persuades anything with weight to come home. The boys were missing for 9 days, which is an entirety if you measure time in pairs, and a commercial break if you measure in news cycle. Union transformed from a town into a stage into an altar. Satellite trucks sprouted like chrome mushrooms, their dishes tilting towards the sky as if gossip required satellite confirmation. Reporters perfected their faces they used for funerals and for miracles they tried to keep in each pocket, warm and ready. Producers tested shots, tear for porch, cluster of volunteers, authoritative maps with arrows. They are not cruel. They are merely efficient at harvesting attention. Every morning began the same. Search grids redrawn, fresh coffee poured into hands that shook from too little sleep and too much intention. Briefings whispered over the hood of a patrol car. The dog stretched, sneezed, then went to work. Finally, a dozen different histories of a dozen different footsteps. Volunteers learned the choreography of hope. Line up, fan out, call names, and listen for anything that isn't wind. Someone always prays aloud. Someone always has a theory. Someone always cries because the land smells like their own child's hair. At night, the town gathered for vigils. Candles held in paper collars made halos of a participant's knuckles. The choruses were selected for maximum righteousness and minimum dissonance. Children clutched stuffed animals that had never been asked to absorb so much protection. If you stand at the edge of such vigil, you can feel the electricity of communal insistence. Let this end the way we want. The hum almost sounds like a spell. Susan and David did interviews until their grief developed scar tissue. They refined the story into a portable object. Easy to hold, easy to pass from anchor to anchor without dropping. He spoke in nouns, sons, home, safe. She spoke in verbs, begged, pleaded, prayed. America loved an evenly divided labor of sorrow. It feels tidy. It promises that if both halves do their jobs, the ending will obey. Behind the altar, a smaller room hummed with fluorescent honesty. Detectives assembled a timeline and found it judiciously cooperative until they snagged on a detail that refused to be domesticated. The red light at Monarch Mills. It was not triggered by the presence of lies. It was triggered by the presence of opposing traffic. No car in the other lane, no red. No red, no compelled stops. No compelled stops, no phantom with a knotted cap and a firearm and a flare for dramatic timing. Physics is such a killjoy. It ruins perfectly good stories with its insistence of consistency. They invited Susan to take polygraph. Polygraphs are like town elders. They cannot tell you what is true. They can just tell you who is uncomfortable. She sat for it, producing waveforms that made the examiner's eyebrows practice calisthenics. He paused the process. He told her to come back the next day. She did not. In union, when someone avoids communication, the ushers notice. Agent Logan called her. He told her the test was inconclusive, which sounds to civilians like mercy, but sounds to investigators like a cracked knuckle announcing a punch. He encouraged her to return. Before the next attempt, he asked a simple, rude question. How did the red light turn red? The town had already taught Susan to pivot gracefully. She did so. The carjacking had not happened at Monarch Mills. How embarrassing. Silly me. No, it had occurred at Carlisle, 13 miles away. She had once, decades the church bulletins ago, carried on with a married man in Carlisle. Returning there would resurrect gossip. She chose to protect her reputation with an alternate location. It was a low-calorie reason, unsatisfying but serviceable if you didn't bother to chew. Sheriff Wells entered with a bluff nested in his pocket, as cozy and treacherous as a switchblade. He let her retell the careless little virgin. He nodded with pastoral sympathy. Then he introduced an authoritative fiction. That street, at that hour, was under surveillance for drug activity. Every inch of it watched by eyes that never blinked. Her version could not have occurred because the watchers would have recorded it. He presented the impossible gently, like a glass of water before the confession. She broke. When a mask shatters, you hear it in grammar before you see it on a face. The past tense fractures. The pronouns stop agreeing. The sentence shortened, then abandoned verbs, then collapsed entirely into sound. She sobbed, and the room filled with salt. She asked for the sheriff's gun. The most honest request she had made in 9 days was a request to stop being alive. It is not noble, it is merely revealing. You don't understand, she said, not to contradict the sheriff, but to announce the story that she had run out of choreography. My children are not all right. The sentence arrived like a blade that had been honed on 9 days of public sympathy. It cut cleanly. The confession was a mosaic assembled out of jagged pieces. She had strapped Michael and Alex in. She had driven to the lake. She had tried to die with them twice and failed, which is to say she had chosen both times to live. The third time she stepped out, released the brake, and let the car follow the only law that never called for backup: gravity. She turned away because watching it would make it real. She was still addicted to unreality. Divers slid into the water with a professionalism that makes death look bureaucratic. They found the Mazda nose down in the darkness, as if bowing to a god too dull to require worship. They attached cables and hauled. When the car broke the surface, the crowd exhaled a sound that the body makes only a few times. When life begins, when it ends, and when it is discovered encased in metal. Inside were 2 boys who had obeyed the last instruction they were given. Stay buckled. Safety devices can be excellent accomplices when handled by someone sufficiently determined. Forensic technicians later measured and calculated and announced roughly 6 minutes for the cabin to fill and the car to vanish. 6 minutes is longer than a commercial break, shorter than a lullaby. Exactly the length of time necessary to turn a person from a parent to perpetrator. 6 minutes is an empire if you fill it with action. It's a guillotine if you fill it with nothing. She filled it with nothing. Rage bloomed, pure incandescence, finally useful. Not only had she drawn her sons, she had offered the country its favorite hand-me-down villain to blame. Her brother apologized to the black community and meant it. The town muttered, because muttering cost less than repentance. The cameras were made, obedient to the rituals of aftermath. Funeral elected white flowers because tradition has poor taste. The caskets were small enough to be carried by men who will never recover from doing it. The pastor spoke about heaven as if heaven is a daycare with spotless floors. David stood narrower than grief, but somehow holding it. When he said their names, the microphones winced. People say closure at times like this. Closure is a bookbinding term, not an emotional outcome. He learned about Susan's confession from the news. Imagine your private apocalypse narrated by a stranger in perfect makeup. Imagine being the last person in your own tragedy to get the script. That is the part of the story that still makes my eyebrows itch. If the 9 days prior were a theater, this is the teardown. The set was struck, the lights were dismantled, and the town was left with a lake that had learned too much of 2 names to speak softly whenever it rained. Polygraphs are the horoscopes of law enforcement, vague, suggestive, and just scientific enough to convince the gullible that destiny can be graphed in ink. Susan agreed to one because guilty people often believe machines will confuse nerves with innocence. She sat beneath the wires, and the examiner, Agent Logan, asked questions so simple even silence would look guilty. Is your name Susan? Do you love your children? Did you give birth, or were they delivered by stork with a poor sense of direction? The machine squiggled its suspicion. Logan withheld her results. He told her to come back. She didn't. Guilt and toddlers share a trait. They both refused to nap when instructed. So Logan called her, told her the test was inconclusive, which is polygraph speak for your story sweats like it's in a sauna. He argued her to return, and before the electrodes touched her again, he pressed on the detail that refused to behave. The red light at Monarch Mills. Physics had already testified without subpoena. That light didn't turn red unless another car triggered it. Not opposing traffic. No red. No red, no stop. No stop, no phantom with a gun with a grudge against car seats. The entire abduction hinged on a signal that never blinked. It was less a hole in her story and more a sinkhole. Susan, professional, quick-changed artist, pivoted The carjacking didn't happen at Monarch Mills at all. How embarrassing. She had misremembered. No, it was at Carlisle, 13 miles away. Why the lie? Because she had an affair there once, with a married man, and she feared Union that would prefer gossip to sympathy. This is Union, of course they would. But her excuses sounded like patching a bullet wound with a bandage shaped like a smiley face. Sheriff Wells joined the next interrogation with a plan that could win him Sheriff of the Year award from the Society of Useful Liars. He listened politely as Susan embroidered Carlisle's fiction with threads of panic. Then he slid the scalpel. That street, he told her, had been under surveillance that very night for drug activity. Dozens of officers, all watching, every inch of it covered. If an abduction happened there, they would have seen it. His tone was gentle, his lie precise. She broke, and breakage makes a sound. Her words collapsed in on themselves, syntax disintegrating into sobs. She begged for Wells' guns, not to shoot him, but herself. At last, an honest request. Then she spoke the words that cut an entire 9-day threat into ribbons. You don't understand. My children are not all right. Her confession came jagged, like glasses shaken from a frame. She had strapped Michael and Alex in. She had driven to the lake. She had intended to go with them, she claimed. Twice she sat in the car herself, foot hesitant on the brake, and twice she chickened out. The third time she stepped out, released the brake, watched long enough to ensure gravity had accepted her offering, and then walked away. Climbed a hill, and composed her face into a mess that would cry convincingly enough at porches and microphones. Divers entered John D. Lake with the quiet efficiency of surgeons. When the monster was dragged from the depths, the crowd gasped, as if oxygen could change the ending. Inside were Alex and Michael, still buckled, still waiting for their mother's rescue. Safety straps had become shackles. 6 minutes. That's how long it took the car to sink completely. 6 minutes in which she could have waded, swum, screamed, and saved. 6 minutes she devoted instead to rehearsal. If sin had a stopwatch, it ticks in water. The outrage was nationwide and layered like lasagna. At the bottom, fury for the drowning. Above it, rage at her choice of scapegoat. Susan had picked the laziest cliche from the town's addict, an anonymous black man with a knit cap and gun. The oldest alibi in the Southern Liars playbook. Her brother Scott went to the cameras and microphones, apologizing to the black community. He shouldn't have needed to, but Union prefers outsourcing accountability to relatives. David, meanwhile, was learning from the evening news that the mother of his children had confessed. Imagine grief delivered by a stranger in a tie, reading from a teleprompter. At the funeral, Union gathered, its casseroles reheated, its guilt carefully folded into hymns. The caskets were heartbreakingly small, dollhouse furniture in a cathedral. White flowers were everywhere, allegedly symbols of innocence, though to me they looked more like surrender. David stood at the pulpit, his voice a fractured line running through the room. He spoke their names, and the microphone winced. July 1995, the trial began. Prosecutors Tommy Pope wanted the death penalty. He sharpened his arguments like knives, determined to cut her excuses like ribbons. The defense wanted life, dressing it up as mercy. America watched, gnawing on its nails, debating whether a mother should die at the state's hands. The sight of her disturbed many. She looked so normal. Monsters are supposed to look monstrous. Susan looked like someone who could borrow a cup of sugar without raising suspicion. That's the problem. Predators with clean haircuts. But Pope had a motive. He had a letter. October 17, 1994, 18 days before the drownings, Tom Finley had written, "You are beautiful, intelligent, and wonderful. You will make some man a great wife, but not me. I don't want children, not yours, not anyone's." There it was, written in ink. Children were the obstacle. Tom didn't want her boys. He didn't want boys at all. Susan understood. If she erased Alex and Michael, she might erase the obstacle. If she claimed victimhood, she might even earn Tom's sympathy. Rescue is a potent aphrodisiac. She rehearsed. She performed. She kept the story alive for 9 days until the lake exhumed it. The defense encountered with broken violins, depression, suicidal ideation, abuse by Beverly Russell. They painted Susan as drowning in her own psychology, her crimes nothing but collateral damage of despair. She hadn't meant to kill, they insisted. She meant to die too, but lost her nerve. A noble attempt if you overlook the math. But the math didn't overlook them. Logan testified. She admitted trying twice with herself in the car, then choosing to step out. The third time, she didn't climb back in. She left the boy strapped, patient, trusting. Forensics testified 6 minutes. 6 minutes in which she could have repented. 6 minutes in which she did nothing. The jury took 2 hours to convict her of 2 counts of murder, 2 hours to choose her fate. They spared her the needle, life in prison, parole possibly after 30 years. Some jurors admitted later that execution felt too clean, too abrupt. Better to let her marinate in silence. Better to let time gnaw on the bones of her excuses. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about architecture, building a cell and letting the years furnish it with echoes. She described the night of the lake as though she were narrating someone else's biography. I released the break, I walked away, I didn't watch, as if she was narrating excused authorship. In 2024, after 30 years, she faced her first parole hearing. She appeared by video, face older but still staged, telling the board she wanted to live with her brother. Maybe become a counselor. The board said no. David sat in the room, repeating his son's name like a spell that keeps doors locked. She will ask again every 2 years. He will answer every time. Union pretends to forget. Its stores open on time. Its church bells ring. Children pedal bicycles past the lake without looking. But John D. Lake never retired. It's not a lake anymore. It is a mirror for anyone willing to see what Union has buried. It is also a mausoleum. If you lean close, you can hear it whisper. It doesn't forgive. Michael was 3 and Alex was 14 months. They have not yet learned cynicism. They trusted harness straps, bedtime songs, and the illusion that mothers protected. Their last lesson was betrayal, administered in 6 minutes. 6 minutes, that's how long the Mazda took to vanish into the dark. Long enough for a prayer to form and rot. Long enough for lungs to claw. Long enough for their mother to reconsider, sprint, dive, and rescue. She didn't. She stood on shore, rehearsing the grief that she would soon sell. The nation asked whether Susan has changed, whether prison braided regret into her DNA, whether she had learned how to be sorry. These are dull questions. The only testimony that matters belongs to water, and water remembers everything. It remembers headlights tilting into its mouth. It remembers the buzzles rising like frantic Morse code. It remembers straps holding still bodies as if obedience were a curse. It remembers silence settling over laughter that never got to echo. Water, unlike people, doesn't negotiate. It doesn't forgive. It archives. And when you look into John D. Lake, you see your own reflection. But if you stare long enough, you realize you are only borrowing the surface. Underneath, the water is still keeping count. This is the story of Susan Leigh Smith, who had 2 baby boys, Alex and Michael, and whenever a man came into her life that she wanted to please and wanted to give everything, and he did not want children, she decided that her son's deaths would be the answer. This woman is cruel, and this woman does not deserve to leave prison. I believe that she doesn't deserve any type of parole. I hope that to this day she still rots in prison and regrets her decisions. Rest in peace to Alex and Michael, those 2 baby boys. They would have been grown adults, living and thriving to this day, if it weren't for their mother's horrendous acts of drowning them in a car. Fun fact, one of my worst fears actually is going into water in a car. Every time I imagine it, my body gets the chills. I can't. And just to imagine 2 baby boys the age of 3 and 14 months old losing their lives to drowning in a car, and not even as an accident but on purpose from their own flesh and blood mother, just chills me to the bone. And this case, just like many others, will never sit right with me. Every case of a mother or a father doing anything harmful or killing their own blood daughters, sons, anything like that, girlfriends, husbands, wives, boyfriends, nieces, nephews, anything like that, just, I don't understand how people can be so psychotic. But this is my story on Susan Leigh and her 2 beautiful sons, Alex and Michael. Rest in peace to those beautiful baby boys, and my condolences to their family, except for the mother, obviously. My condolences to David, the dad. If you enjoyed this video, please don't be scared to hit that thumbs up and hit that big old red subscribe button. Share with some friends, maybe family. Don't drown anyone in a car. And I hope that you guys have a great day, evening, or night, and stay tuned for more videos like this. And I will see you guys next time.